Namaste. Welcome to this session. We have commenced considering Ishvara. And as I said in the last session, Patanjali has defined Ishvara. He doesn't say that he is speaking about is Brahman, or that he is speaking about is Bhagavan, or it is Mahadev, or Devadidev, or Paramatma. He is speaking about Ishvara. And as I said, this concept of Ishvara is first and foremost and in best way articulated in Pancharatra Samhita. And Patanjali got his wisdom from Pancharatra Samhita, being Nitya Suri, being Vishnu Tuta, or resident of Vaikuntha, inmate of Vaikuntha, being of Vaikuntha. So, Patanjali, for the first time in all the darshanas, amongst all the darshanas, is postulating this Ishvara, which is concept of Pancharatra Agama. And therefore it is best defined there. Brahma, as it literally means, it is all pervasive. It is Bruhadakara. It is Bruhad Tattva. Therefore Brahma. Now Ishvara, it is because Ishana Shila Ichha Matena Sakala Jagata Uddhara Kshamaha Ishvaraha. And it is immanent being within us, immanent as well as transcendent. So, it is a technical term. Ishvara is a technical term. And as I said in the last session, even Bhagavad Gita has tremendous influence of Pancharatra wisdom, because Bhagwan Sri Krishna himself, being Adi Narayana, had given this wisdom to Nitya Suris. Otherwise we have concept of Ishvara, which is based on the word Aishwarya. In one of the Vedantas, Ishvara is considered to be Shabala Brahma. Now, Brahman is an immutable principle, but for their convenience of philosophy, they postulate it as Shabala Brahma. Shabala means tainted. Shabala means delimited and tainted. So, for Saguna Upasana, they brought the concept of Ishvara. And then they made it Shabala Brahma, that means tainted Brahma. Now, if the Brahma is untaintable, then why and how does it get tainted? But that is how they postulate, and they will have their own arguments. Anyway, so point is, what I am trying to say, do not mistake the term Ishvara as it occurs in one of those Vedantas where they have a concept of Ishvara. This is a concept that has come from Pancharatra Agama, and not as it comes in some of the Vedantas. Or for common man, Ishvara is because of infinite Aishwaryam. Aishwaryam means glories. So, one who is superhuman and superhuman to the extent of infinity. So, that is the Parama Aishwaryam, and from Parama Aishwaryam, the term literally can be derived. It becomes an inflection. So, even that will not be proper. Just because he is Aishwaryavan and most Aishwaryavan, unexceedable Aishwaryavan, that Aishwarya, the glory, cannot be exceeded, unexceedability, because of infinitude. It is not because of that the word Ishvara has been brought in here. That also has to be understood. So, Ishvara, the word, has been brought in here from Pancharatra Agama, Vaishnava Agama. Now, it will be interesting to know that there are so many concepts about God, divinity. The Brahman itself has been defined in various perspectives and dimensions, because there are so many Vedantas. Vedanta is not one. Vedanta will be many. So, if you are a little familiar with Indian philosophical system, there is Dvaita Vedanta, there is Advaita Vedanta, there is Vishishtadvaita Brahma Vedanta, there is Shuddhadvaita Vedanta. Then there is Achintya Bheda Bheda. There are so many Vedantas. One and the same text of Brahma Sutras has been described in various points of view, ranging from duality to non-duality, and then so many aspects in between duality and non-duality. So, this is how this principle which is spoken about is that way. There cannot be just one standpoint to describe this infinite being, all-pervasive being, which is everywhere. But then in the world we come across so many postulations of the God or divinity or ultimate principle or ultimate truth. It's so intriguing, the concept itself is so intriguing because of this, that it is all pervasive, it is everywhere, it is there for everyone to speak about, and that's why there are so many concepts about that absolute principle. Even Vedas declare, Ekam Sadvipra Bahuda Vadanti. It is only one, but different wise people, different wisdoms speak about it in multitudinal ways. That's a marvel. It doesn't happen with respect to some objects. The rose is rose for everyone. Milk is milk for everyone. It might be called in different names, but it is not differently taken. Different languages will have different nouns for a substance. Milk will be called in different ways in different languages. But they all mean that substance. So, in anthrocentric thought process, we just look at the things as they are for mankind. And then we describe that and we have our own physics about it. What milk is for mankind What milk is for subhumans? There are so many species. What milk is for superhumans is not the consideration of physics. Physics is a subject which is so anthrocentric. So, from man's perspective, from man's dimension, human perspective, that substance will be described. But what it means to all different lives is variegated. Even within the man, somebody likes the milk very much, somebody likes the milk, somebody doesn't like the milk, somebody doesn't like the milk at all, somebody rejects the milk, somebody accepts the milk. So, what it means to one is something countless. What milk means to even mankind is countless. Although milk is milk, but what does it mean? Now, here is the principle. What it means to each mind will be different, and therefore we have different concepts of God or divinity or the absolute, the ultimate. So, what the God is for common man? For common man who has theistic mind, deistic mind, what is the God? God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. And then why common man wants a God, atheistic person wants a God, or deistic person wants a God, is that he provides solutions to all problems, from meager problems to huge unsolvable problems. He is the one who gives solutions. He is only capable of giving you the Ishta Prapti, Anishta Nivrutti, and no one else. All that you want can be given by divinity. All that you want to get rid of, it is only divinity which can do it. It can only save you from that undesirable. So, this is what common man's view about the absolute principle is, that Ishta Prapti, Anishta Nivrutti. He can grant all that we want, and he can help us avoid all that we don't want. And that's why common man prays God. The common man worships God. He is the one who can solve all problems, can give solutions to all problems. And that's why theistic man and deistic mind take recourse to this principle, which might be called as God, or the Devadideva, the God of all gods, or only one, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, is capable of doing anything and everything. Nothing is impossible. So when anything is not impossible to anything, something is not impossible to something, that is divinity. This is common man's view. Now we are trying to understand what the divinity is for a philosopher and for a philosophical system. So, description of this principle will be one who is not a philosopher, who is a mundane man, worldly man, man of worldly activity, business of activity. How that person will describe God is one description. But how a philosophical system and philosopher will postulate divinity is totally different. Like you and me call particular substance as milk, but a scientific community will try to describe the milk by a formula. Like we say, we all breathe air. Common man says we breathe air. Now, what air that we breathe will be described by a scientist. He says it is composed of 21% oxygen and 72% nitrogen and so on and so forth. So there are formulae to every substance. When a scientist has to describe something, he will describe technically. There are technical nomenclatures to everything. We call something as water, but then scientists call something as H2O. So, how something will be defined or described by a common man, layman, non-scientific man, and then what a scientist will describe and define the same thing, there is a big difference. So what philosophers will describe and define the same thing will be totally different. So those who are soaked in mysticism, they will describe the same substance differently. Mysticism will tell them different characteristics of the same object. So there are different disciplines and sciences and philosophies who have different standpoint for one thing. So how the divinity will be described by common man. Now still, divinity has not come in the sphere of science to describe the divinity or the God. So that's why there is something that is called as metaphysics. If it is physics, the scientists will definitely investigate. Scientist community will certainly have some kind of authority to describe and credence to describe what something is. But therefore, there is a subject called metaphysics, and therefore that will not come in the radius of science, which deals with something that is physics, something that is in the physics, that is of the physics. But philosophy tells us that metaphysics is not just beyond metaphysics. It is not that the physics ends and metaphysics begins, that it might be construed that way. The metaphysics is all pervasive and doesn't allow you to escape from it. But we take a bypass every time, and that's why we do not get touched by metaphysics, because we think it is transcendent. It must be taking you beyond physics, and then it is metaphysics. But that is not the proper notion or idea about it. It is something to which we take a bypass, and we can take a bypass and carry out our business of activity of life. What is there that there is no metaphysics in it? There is always a metaphysics in everything, anything that you come across. There is always a metaphysics in everything that you say, you utter, you say, you express. But we being not students of metaphysics, we don't identify any metaphysics. Say in a sentence, if I say, I am reading a book. Now, it doesn't occur to you that there is any metaphysics in the statement that I have uttered that I am reading a book. And that's why we think that metaphysics has nothing to do here. And we can easily take a bypass, and that is convenient for our business activity of life. Metaphysics will unnecessarily create a pause in you, halt in you, and make you inquire into it. We don't want inquiries everywhere, and therefore we take a bypass to metaphysics. Now I am reading a book. There is meta aspects. I. What is this I? If you are critical about that subjective entity of pronoun I, which comes in a statement, I am reading a book, you will land into metaphysics. Because that is a metaphysical subject. It is not an empirical and temporal subject, which most of the people of business activity of life and those who are sunk in mundanity and practicality of life, they don't bother about it. Who am I? This question doesn't occur. But if you put a question, I am reading a book, who am I? It will soon land you into metaphysics. If you are reality seeker. If you are not reality seeker, then there is no metaphysics for you. Then I am reading a book. Reading. What is reading? If we investigate reading, we will only end our process analysis with the fact that my eyes are engaged with the book, my mind is engaged with the book, and there is some subject matter in the book, and I am trying to comprehend. I am able to read and understand the matter of the book. But who is reading? It is my mind and my senses. Now, we don't have inquiry to understand what are really senses, from where are the senses, whence are the senses. The mind is there. What is really the mind? We don't bother. Common man doesn't bother about it, because that will inconvenience the business of life. You will be stuck there. If you go to investigate what is my mind, which is reading the book, what is that intelligence which is understanding the book, it will be putting a halt. It will obstruct your business activity of life, and therefore we conveniently take a bypass. We don't want to look into metaphysics because we lack in inquisitiveness. About the book. What is this book? The book is made up of material. What is that material? From where has it come? So if you go towards the source of that material of which the book is made up of, it will again land you something beyond physics. So the book itself is containing metaphysics. If you question what is this matter, we don't inquire into what is this matter of book with regards to very material of the book, in the sense of which the book is made up of. We just are concerned about the content of the book. That's the matter for us. That this is economic matter, this is psychological matter, this is physical matter, this is chemistry, this is physics, this is politics, this is economics, etc., etc. That is what is matter of the book for us. But if you really look at the very matter of the book, in the sense the physics of the book is paper, from where the paper has come. So if you go on reaching the cause of it, this paper has come from paper mill. Paper mill turned out this paper from paper pulp. How was the paper pulp turned out? What is that pulp? So where will you go? It will land you, then you come to perhaps the trees. Because we are very much aware today that the paper is turned out from wood and botanical matter. Then what is that? What is a tree? You will have to go into botany. You will have to go into biology. So we are not doing it to inconvenience our business activity of life, and that's why we are conveniently in business activity of life. But philosophy doesn't do that. It goes into inquiry of anything. Where is it that you don't have metaphysics? Everywhere you have metaphysics. But we don't go for conveniency of business activity of life. We end with something, that this is a car, this is a table, this is a television. We don't go beyond how the television is made up of. Then you'll have to understand technology. then it is made up of some matter, from where the matter has come. So it will take you in so many branches of knowledge which we do not do, just not to inconvenience the business activity of life. Similarly, this principle which is being spoken of is all pervasive. But we don't want to have a pause or stop or some kind of suspension in our activity of business activity of life. Therefore, we don't inquire into it. When the God is omnipresent, where is it that it is not there? How is it then it is there? Is it just a matter which is all pervasive matter? No, it is not matter, all pervasive matter, that is Prakriti. Then why the divinity is there, all pervasive? For what purpose? Is it pervading everything because it is all pervasive, unlimited? Or does it have any role and function, and that is why it is all pervasive? Because the space is all pervasive. Now, is the divinity also all pervasive like space? Or does it have any primary function by being all pervasive? That's about divinity. Usually divinity is, or the God is not subject of religion, isms. The divinity, the God, or whatever you might like to call, is actually subject matter of metaphysics, mysticism, dharma, and not religion, not faith, not belief. But then they have taken over the concept and they think they are the only one who can speak about the God. The religions, the religious heads, the pontiffs, etc., etc. The religion, in the sense, doesn't need divinity. It can be without divinity as well. There are so many atheistic religions. They don't need God, but still they are there. It is because the subject matter of what we are speaking about is not of religion, in the sense isms. Isms have to just give set of rules for mankind, do's and don'ts, and engage the person in some kind of practice, some kind of culture, some kind of ethos, bind them with some ethos. So if you are bound by that ethos, then you say, I am Christian, I am Islam, I am Hindu. So it is that culture, gravity of culture. If it is exercised on you, then you say, I am of this belief. This principle that we are speaking about is subject matter of metaphysics, subject matter of dharma, and subject matter of deep inquiry. If you go into inquiry of everything, it will land you at something of which we are now speaking about. So, the God is spoken of in so many ways. Now, usually, if you want to know the God, you will turn to some belief books of isms. So somebody say, I will look into Quran and try to know this principle. Somebody will say, I will look into the Bible and I will try to know this thing. So there are various dharma granthas, scriptures of various beliefs today in the world. And they will go back to that, their scripture of their belief, and they will try to understand God. But that is not proper. It should be left to philosophers to inquire into. It should be left to mystics to inquire into. It should be left to dharma, in the sense we understand dharma, sanatana dharma. It is not ism. It is not just culture. ethnic culture, or belief material culture, faith material culture. So these subjects have hijacked the concept and have spoken about, and we think that we can only go there and look into about this principle, characteristics of this principle, etc., etc. Anyway, so if you ask about this ultimate principle to people of different faiths, they will tell you in different ways. So the Christian will tell you about for which the Bible is testament. Islam, those who believe in Islam will try to take the testament from Quran, so on and so forth. But this is something that philosophers will inquire, philosophers should inquire, metaphysicists will inquire, mystics will inquire, and they will only describe. They will only describe and they will only tell you what the divinity is. So, here we are trying to understand from Patanjali, from yoga system, what is yoga? Yoga is philosophy. Yoga is dharma. Yoga is Samskruti. Yoga is a Gudhavada, mysticism. If you recall very initial talks I gave you to introduce about Darshana Shastra, the columns of Dharma Shastra, there one of the columns was mysticism. Nothing is bereft of mysticism. Everything ultimately has mysticism. It is veiled by the objectness. Mysticism is all pervasive. So, mysticism can speak about, philosopher will speak about, darshanik will speak about, and dharmagnya will speak about. When I say dharmagnya, not religion here. Dharma means dharma. So, now there are some faiths and beliefs who dogmatically believe that principle, the God principle, the Allah principle, the divinity principle is formless. So any form given to divinity, they will vehemently reject it. They will be quite severe on concept, what we call as Saguna Ishvara, Saguna Brahma. They will not tolerate, they will be intolerant about it. So they say it is formless. Okay, if it is formless, then is that not omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent? Is it spatial concept, your divinity, that it is formless? Okay. But is it spatialized? Or is it all pervasive? Then they will say it's all pervasive, no doubt about it. That means divinity doesn't have form, but divinity is in all forms. Because what we have around us is all different kinds of forms. So divinity doesn't have form, but the divinity is all in all forms, and not just by default, but as a controller, as a regulator, as a governor. Oh, what is wrong in taking the God with form? What is the point in vehemently postulating that the divinity is formless? Now, if divinity is formless, then it is not matter to be loved. And therefore, it is not matter for bhakti. If it has to be loved, if there has to be bhakti, if there has to be devotion, then it has to be accepted in some form. Because you don't fall in love with formless, nominal thing. You always fall in love with something which has a form, and you always revere something which has a form. How will you revere a formless thing? So then such postulation about divinity that is only formless, exclusively formless, nothing but formless, that means you do not expect any bhakti. Now this divinity or this principle that we are speaking about is for everyone. It is Purusha Vishesha. It is in everyone. It is for everyone. It is within everyone. And if there has to be bhakti, pranidhana, if there has to be bhakti, then you can't be vehement in postulating that it is formless, nominal. Then you will never be able to have any bhakti, which is a form of devotion, which is a form of love. So if this principle is for everyone, it should be available for every strata of emotions, every mindset. It must be appealing to every mindset. Now, formless doesn't appeal necessarily, compulsorily, every mindset. So that means if you consider that divinity is formless, that means you don't want that somebody should be loving it essentially. And if it is to be loved, you can't expect everyone to be loving that which has no form at all, no appeal at all, no characteristics at all, no attributes at all. Something that has attributes, something has characteristics, may be loved by someone. If you want someone to be loving divinity or this principle, the God principle or divinity principle, it is not proper to postulate that as formless, nominal, shapeless, colorless. Then it almost amounts to void. Who will fall in love with void? So if you have such a concept, if the divinity is really like that, that means there cannot be mention that there must be bhakti for this principle. There must be devotion for this principle. Or this principle must be loved and having devotion, etc., or reverence, etc., or bhakti, etc. So in order that, now if this principle is in all forms, there are certain forms which babies will like. There are certain forms the children will like. What the baby likes is not necessarily liked by a child. What a child likes is not necessarily liked by a teenager. What is liked by a teenager is not necessarily liked by youth. So this should be something that has appeal for everyone. So therefore in Sanatana Dharma or in metaphysical Dharma, in real Dharma, the God comes in a very form. The child will also love it. The child will love it, children will love it, teenagers will love it, young will love it. They of all ages, they can love it. People with different likes will also like divinity. Because some people have, we all have likes and dislikes, class of likes and dislikes. Subjectively, my class of likes and dislikes are not the same to you. Your class of likes and dislikes are different. So, the God will come in the form that you like. So you will be able to like it. You will be able to liking the God. If you are liking the God, you can have devotion for God, you can have reverence for God, you can have bhakti for God. My likes are different. So I will find my God in my likes, and therefore I'll be inclined to get into gravity of it. I will love it. I will have devotion for it. I will have reverence for it. So the God is not in formless condition, multiformed. The God is really multiformed, therefore it is meant for everyone. What unintelligent person loves and what intelligent person loves, what stupid will love and what wise will love are different things. So it's not only biological stages as we considered just now, infant and child and a teenager, and then the youth and adult and old and very old and decrepit, etc., etc. Not just that. People have different mindsets. So the divinity will have appeal for intellectual mind on one hand. The God also will be appealing to mental, emotional mind or emotional, sentimental mind, logical mind, analytical mind. Then only it is meant for everyone. If only intellectuals like it and then those are unintelligent do not like it, or vice versa, then it's not a universal appeal for love or devotion or bhakti. So divinity comes in all forms. So to properly put it, it is not formless, it is omniformed. It comes in several forms. It will come in all forms. Because it is all pervasive, it is there in all forms. So there are some forms which the children like, there are some forms which the teenagers like, there are certain forms which young people like, there are certain forms which the adults like, and then old people like. So they will be able to have their love for this principle because it can be found in their likes. So in Eastern philosophy, in Indian philosophy, this has been spoken about in all its dimensions. Therefore, ekam sad vipra bahuda vadanti. It is spoken of in different ways. What is a God to a stupid person, unwise person, unintelligent person, sub-intelligent person? Then what is God to a very intelligent person? Yes, it is subject matter for all of them. You might be less intelligent or more intelligent or most intelligent or least intelligent or unintelligent. The God is available in some form or the other. This is why it is omnipresent. It is not only the God is omniscient. God is there for everyone to know in whatever one has the capacity. Limited, very limited to unlimited. So it's not that the God is only omniscient. It's not only the God is all-knowing and all-knower, but the God is also knowable for everyone. That's how the God should be available. And that is how it is in our Astika Darshana. The divinity comes in all those forms. Therefore, when Patanjali says Ishvara should be there for pranidhana, pranidhana means bhakti vishesha. That means you must be, first of all, you must be liking it. Then liking it so much that you love it. You love it so much that you have devotion for it, for reverence for it. All various forms of love. Now it is a formless, nominal, no attribute, no characteristics. Who will love it? Can all love it? No, all won't love it. There might be few who love it, but not all. But he is meant for everyone. And therefore, He is immanent in everyone. Therefore, the likes and dislikes, which are very, very subjectivistic, he is the locus of all the subjective entities, subjective substrate. And therefore, we have so many concepts of this principle, which we'll be discussing at some stage in this series itself on Ishvara. Saguna Brahma, Nirguna Brahma, Savishesha Brahma, Nirvishesha Brahma, Sakara Brahma, Nirakara Brahma. So all these concepts come in Oriental thought process. Unlike the very different belief systems, they have one frame for divinity, and they say this is only divinity. You must only accept that one. But that you might accept, but you may not have appeal. You need to have appeal. You just can't be accepting divinity. You must have appeal for divinity. Particularly here when it is for pranidhana. What is the point in accepting divinity but having no appeal for divinity? What role will it play in your life? So merely it is not atheism and theism. If you accept divinity, it must be having appeal. It must be appealing you. There are so many things that we accept for which we don't have appeal, or we have negative appeal, yet we don't reject it. So the atheism, so-called concept in Western thought process and Western religions, etc., they speak about atheistic and theistic person. The theistic person is merely accepting God, but the merely accepting God is not be all and all. It must have appeal. If it doesn't have appeal, what is it that omnipotent entity going to do for you? Tell me. But if you love divinity, it's a last resort, it's the only resort, it's the strongest resort, it is enormous resource, all resourceful. But if we do not revere it, have any devotion for it, any love for it, any like for it, what is it going to do for you? Then it becomes material entity. Yes, the God is there, I have to accept, I accept. Then it becomes a material entity which is all pervasive. If it doesn't have any appeal to you, then there is no subjectivism in it. You objectively accept divinity. Yes, it is there. Why for is it there? Does it have any purpose? Does it have any purpose as omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent? See, the space is everywhere. But the omnipresence of space really doesn't serve our purpose beyond accommodating us everywhere. It doesn't become last resort. I could take resort in space. If you are in difficulty, you can't say I will take resort in space. The space is only is there for you to get accommodated. It will be accommodating you, that's all. Avakasheti iti akasham. It will only accommodate you. It will not remove your fear or your problem or your difficulty. Space won't remove it. As a physical entity, it won't remove it. The space has to do something within you so that all crowd of fear or panic goes set aside. So it has some purpose within you. If it plays that role within you, then you will definitely take recourse to it. You will not take recourse to physical space, because physical space is everywhere. It's all pervasive. But you don't find solutions to your problems in physical space. You get solutions to your problems in figurative space. So if the divinity is like physical space which is all pervasive. You cannot rule out space from anything and anywhere. Even if you have solid matter in front of you, the space is within it. It gets into it. So it is inside that solid matter. Nothing is unpenetrable for space. The space will be there. It is by being all pervasive, it is already there. It doesn't have to enter the solid matter. It is already there in solid matter. So a little higher physics will tell you about it. Understanding the higher physics, you will understand that the space is already there. Space doesn't have to come. The space is already there. And you can't dislodge the space to structure up a solid structure. So, the point is, the divinity has a purpose as divinity, the God has purpose as God, and that purpose as God means it gives you bliss, joy, solution, resources, and helps you overcome your problems, end your problems, set aside your problems. That is why we common people worship divinity. When we are in difficulties, we think of God, because we think only God can save us. That means He is a savior. Now that is an attribute. Now even those who believe in formless God, yet they say everything is done by God, everything happens by this God, but He is formless. He is your savior, but He is formless. Then it can be argued that your God is a ghost, because we can't cite a ghost, but the ghost is solving your problems. Ghost can solve our problems. We don't see something as ghost, but the ghost is solving the problems. So is your divinity a ghost that you can't be seeing because it doesn't have form? You can't be experiencing because it doesn't have form. So the mystics, even in those beliefs, they speak of God experience. That means they experience God. Now it is formless, noumenal. What kind of experience will come? So there is a fault in such postulations which we come across in these religions of our times, Abrahamic religions, that there is God realization, there is God experience, but the God is formless. Now how can you experience the formless, which gives you that infinite bliss, infinite solace? So those are the contradictions. So here the principle is being postulated for pranidhana, bhakti vishesha. So then you have to understand that it cannot be such principle which has no attributes, no characteristics, and the qualities which one can love, one should love, one may love, and then have devotion, reverence, etc., etc. So here Patanjali, a philosopher, is postulating divinity. So let's try to understand how Patanjali is postulating this divinity. Now, as I said, this has come from Pancharatra Agama. Let us try to understand what is the description of this entity in Pancharatra. But that is in another session. So, namaskar all of you.